Welcome to your personalized deep dive. Today we'll be going through the world of economic warfare. You've given us a fascinating stack of sources, mostly excerpts from Edward Fishman's book, Chokepoints.
What's really interesting about this book is how Fishman takes historical examples and weaves them together with current events. He shows how economic warfare has really changed. It used to be a blunt instrument, but it's evolved, it's become more precise, more potent. And a lot of that has to do with America's unique position in the global financial system.
Right. It's kind of like, remember learning about Athens and that whole Megarian decree thing?
Absolutely. That's actually where our journey begins.
Wow, from ancient Greece to the intricacies of modern finance, that's quite a leap.
It is, and Choke Points does a fantastic job of bridging that gap, showing how far we've come, especially in the last few decades.
Okay, so ancient Greece, tell me more about that.
Well, the Megarian decree was essentially an ancient Athenian sanction against Megara. They wanted to cripple Megara's trade, weaken them militarily and politically. It's a classic example of how economic warfare has always been alluring.
Makes sense. Hit them where it hurts, their wallets.
Exactly. And this idea, it's been around for centuries. But as Choke Points illustrates, things have become far more complex, especially with finance and technology becoming such major battlegrounds.
That's interesting. So where does the whole petrodollar thing fit into this picture?
That's a crucial piece of the puzzle. See, back in the 1970s, after the Bretton Woods system crumbled, the U.S. saw an opportunity. They made the dollar the main currency for all oil transactions.
Wow, so that was a deliberate strategy.
It was a brilliant one, actually. By requiring countries to hold dollars for oil, the U.S. gained incredible leverage. Economists call it exorbitant privilege. It really shaped the global financial system as we know it, giving the U.S. a huge amount of power and setting the stage for modern economic warfare, as Fishman describes it.
Okay, so we've got this powerful tool, the petrodollar, but who's actually using it? Who are the people calling the shots in this new world of economic warfare?
Well, that's where a new breed of official emerged. What Fishman calls the sanctions technocrats. You see, especially after 9/11, there was this push to combat terrorism financing, and the U.S. Treasury Department took the lead.
So these sanctions technocrats, they're the ones pulling the levers, so to speak.
Precisely. They're wielding financial instruments to achieve foreign policy goals. And one of the best examples of this is Stuart Levy. He was a key architect of U.S. sanctions against Iran and North Korea. Fishman actually details Levy's journey, from someone who was initially a bit skeptical of Treasury's power to becoming a true master of financial warfare.
It's funny, you wouldn't think someone from the Justice Department dealing with law enforcement would end up being a maestro of financial pressure.
It is fascinating, isn't it? And a perfect example of that evolution is Levy's work with the Iran sanctions program.
So tell me, how did those sanctions evolve? Because I remember early attempts to sanction Iran were seen as pretty ineffective, like a toothless tiger.
That's right. But things changed under Levy, and people like Adam Subin, they got creative, turned those sanctions into sophisticated weapons.
Give me an example, like how did they do that?
Well, one pivotal moment was the targeting of Banco Delta Asia, a small bank in Macau.
Macau. That's an interesting choice. Why Macau?
This bank was facilitating transactions for North Korea's illicit activities. By going after them, the U.S. sent a powerful message.
We're watching you kind of thing.
Exactly. Even seemingly insignificant players in the global financial system weren't safe. And it showed just how far-reaching U.S. financial influence really is.
Clever. What other tactics did they employ?
They came up with this ingenious idea: overseas escrow accounts for Iranian oil revenues. This allowed Iran to technically still sell their oil, but the money, the proceeds, remained largely untouchable. They couldn't easily access it.
So they found a way to sort of neutralize Iran's economic gains while still allowing them to participate in the global oil market. That's remarkable.
It was a nuanced approach, applying pressure without completely crippling Iran's entire economy. But of course, such a strategy wasn't without its critics.
Right. I imagine there were internal debates, disagreements about how far to push these sanctions, especially within the Obama administration, right?
Absolutely. Fishman highlights those internal divisions. Some worried about unintended consequences, especially for European allies who had strong economic ties to Russia.
It's a delicate balancing act, isn't it? Trying to inflict damage on your target without destabilizing the whole system.
Exactly. And that balancing act becomes even more precarious when you're dealing with a major player on the world stage like Russia. And that brings us to 2014, a turning point: the annexation of Crimea.
And that's where things escalated, right? Trying to target a massive energy exporter like Russia with its deep ties to the global economy must have presented a whole new set of challenges.
It did. The U.S. response evolved,
Yeah.
moving from very specific, targeted measures to much broader sectoral sanctions, eventually culminating in a truly unprecedented act.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. What happened next?
The U.S., along with its allies, made the decision to freeze Russia's central bank assets. It was a bold move. They essentially weaponized the dollar in a way that had never been done before.
I'm curious, why target the central bank? Aren't those supposed to be independent? Like they stay above the whole political fray, right?
In theory, yes. But Russia's central bank, they had amassed quite a bit of foreign currency reserves, over $630 billion. The purpose of these reserves, of course, was to stabilize the ruble and also to finance imports. But they could also be used for, well, let's just say, less noble purposes.
I see. So things like funding military operations or even propping up those entities that were under sanctions.
Exactly. By freezing those assets, the U.S. was aiming to cripple Russia's ability to wage economic war, to stop them from supporting the aggression in Ukraine.
It's a big move, for sure. I can't imagine everyone was on board with that strategy, though, right?
You're right. There was some pushback, particularly from within the U.S. Treasury Department. People like Janet Yellen, they cautioned against it, worried about potential unintended consequences.
Like what? What are they concerned about?
Well, think about it. The dollar's global dominance relies on trust, on stability. By weaponizing it, you risk eroding that trust. Other nations might start looking for alternative currencies, and that could lead to a fragmentation of the global financial system.
So it was a gamble, really.
Yeah.
A high-stakes play with potential ramifications for the entire global economy. It makes you wonder if it was worth the risk.
It definitely raised some eyebrows. And this brings us to another crucial aspect that Fishman explores, the rise of China.
China, yes. They've become a real economic powerhouse. And that's created a whole new set of tensions, hasn't it?
Right.
Especially in the tech sector.
Exactly. Fishman uses the case of Huawei to illustrate this U.S.-China tech war that we're seeing unfold.
Huawei, that's an interesting one. What made them such a target?
Well, Huawei was, and still is, a dominant force in 5G technology. And that really spooked the U.S. government. There were concerns about their ties to the Chinese government, about the potential for espionage or sabotage.
So it became more than just economic competition. It was an issue of national security.
Precisely. And the U.S. took a number of measures to restrict Huawei's access to crucial technologies.
Like the usual suspects, I imagine. Things like export controls.
Export controls, yes, but also something a little more obscure but equally potent. The Foreign Direct Product Rule, or FDPR.
The FDPR, that doesn't ring a bell. What is that exactly?
Imagine you're building a house, right? And the company that supplies your lumber is suddenly banned from selling to you. That's essentially what the FDPR did. It gave the U.S. the power to control the sale of any foreign-made goods, even if those goods were manufactured outside of the U.S., as long as they incorporated U.S. technology.
Wow, so even if a chip, for example, was made in Taiwan, but it used American technology, the U.S. could prevent it from being sold to Huawei.
Exactly. It sent shockwaves through the global tech industry. Companies had to scramble, reevaluate their entire supply chains, their relationships with Huawei.
That's a major disruption.
Yeah.
How did China react to all of this?
Publicly, they condemned the U.S. actions, called them unjust, politically motivated. But behind closed doors, I think they recognized the vulnerabilities it exposed. Their tech sector, it's heavily reliant on foreign components, especially semiconductors.
So they put on a brave face, but they also started looking for ways to reduce their reliance on American tech, right?
Absolutely. It was a wake-up call for Beijing. It underscored the need for them to build up their own domestic chip manufacturing capabilities, to diversify their supply chains. You know, one thing that stands out from Chokepoints is that economic warfare, it's not always a guaranteed path to success. Look at North Korea, for example. Decades of sanctions, and they haven't achieved denuclearization.
That's a really good point. Sanctions can be effective, but they're not a cure-all. There are so many factors at play.
That's right. The target's resilience, how united the international community is, and whether there's the will to maintain that pressure over a long period of time. It's a complex equation.
So where does all of this leave us? Are we heading toward a world of perpetual economic conflict?
That's the big question, isn't it? The increasing use of economic warfare, it has profound implications for the future of globalization.
What are the potential outcomes here, both the good and the bad?
Well, the worst case scenario, and it's something we need to consider, is a fragmented global economy. We could see rival blocs emerge, alternative financial systems popping up as countries try to shield themselves from U.S. economic
A
dominance.
world divided rather than united by economic interests.
Sadly, yes. But there's another way to look at this. Maybe this is an opportunity, a chance to reimagine globalization, to build a more equitable system, one where economic interdependence is seen as a strength, not a weapon.
So a more balanced global system, one that's more fair, more just.
Precisely. And as we wrap up this deep dive into economic warfare, I think it's important to offer our listeners a concise summary of the key insights we've gleaned from Chokepoints. Would you agree?
I think that's a great idea. Let's break down the 10 most important takeaways from our exploration. Okay, so uh, what are those 10 takeaways? What did we learn from choke points?
Well, first off, economic warfare, it's not new, it's been around forever, but the way it's done, that's changed drastically. Finance and technology, those are the main battlegrounds now.
So no more just, like blockades and embargoes.
Right, now it's all about manipulating these complex financial networks, controlling vital tech, like semiconductors.
Which brings us to, I guess, takeaway number 2,
Mhm.
that whole petrodollar thing. America really has a lot of power because of that.
It is, economists call it exorbitant privilege. The fact that the US dollar is the main currency for oil trading, that gives them a massive amount of leverage on the global stage.
And the ones actually using that leverage, those are the sanctions technocrats. Takeaway number 3.
Yeah, these people, they're the new power brokers operating behind the scenes, using finance as a weapon to achieve, those geopolitical goals.
But as we've seen, sanctions aren't always a silver bullet. Sometimes they just don't work. That's takeaway number 4, right?
Sanctions can be really powerful, but it's not a guarantee. So many things can influence their success. How tough the target is, global cooperation, and of course, maintaining pressure for a long, long time.
And when you're dealing with a major player like Russia, someone so deeply embedded in the global economy, sanctions become even trickier. Takeaway number 5, I suppose.
Yeah, the annexation of Crimea in 2014, that was a huge escalation. It really forced everyone to think about the fallout of economic warfare between superpowers.
Which brings us to takeaway number 6, freezing Russia's central bank assets. That was something else.
It was dramatic, for sure.
Right.
Weaponizing the dollar like that, it really raised concerns about, well, about the entire global financial system, the stability of the dollar itself, the potential for everything to fragment.
And then you have China entering the picture, a rising technological powerhouse. That's got to be takeaway number 7.
China's rise has definitely created a whole new level of competition with the US, and it's playing out in a lot of different ways. The whole Huawei situation, that's a prime example.
Speaking of Huawei, that leads to takeaway number 8.
Yeah.
Using things like export controls and the foreign direct product rule to block China from getting crucial tech.
These are powerful tools, no doubt, but they also carry risks. They can disrupt supply chains, even accelerate the decoupling of economies.
So you've got this economic rivalry going on and all this uncertainty about globalization. Takeaway number 9, maybe.
It really makes you think about the future of, well, everything. Trade, finance, the rules that govern the international system. It's all up in the air.
And ultimately, I guess, takeaway number 10. The choices we make now, they have huge implications for the future.
We're at a crossroads. The path we choose now, it could lead to more conflict, more fragmentation, or maybe, just maybe, it could lead to a more stable, more just world. It's up to us to decide.
It's definitely a lot to think about. This deep dive, it's been, well, eye-opening.
Choke points. It gives you the knowledge to really analyze these issues, to form your own opinions.
So, to all our listeners out there, keep learning. Keep asking those tough questions. Keep diving deep into the forces shaping our world.
That's right. The journey doesn't end here.
That's a great point. And on that note, we'll wrap up this episode. Until next time, keep exploring.